Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait a few seconds here to wait for participants to get logged in, and then we'll be starting. Really grateful you can all join us from wherever you are in the world. Our audience continues to get more and more diverse, which I love. And as I mentioned in the last webinar, if you have any input that you think would help to make this a more global presentation, please don't hesitate to contact us. That can be global in terms of themes, participation. Any input would be welcome, because the webinar exists where we've created this series to meet your needs. So we wanted any feedback that you can give us helps us to make a better webinar series. And our goal is to make it as good as possible and to serve as many people as possible. So I think I'll go ahead and start. We've got people logging in. I'll just start with some brief introductions. Starting with myself, I am Pia de Solenni. I'm the I'm the Executive Director and President of the Global Institute of Church Management. And we are hosting this webinar series in conjunction with the Program of Church Management in Rome, which is the flagship program of church management established about 3 years ago at the request of Cardinal Pell to help form clerics, lay, and religious leaders in the church in the principles of management. One of the things that's really important is that we don't consider ourselves a business program. Our goal is not to create MBA priests and bishops. Obviously, some are called to that, and there are specific programs for them. Our goal is really to help people in leadership, particularly religious and clerics, to be able to understand the principles of management so that they can hire the right and oversee the right lay expertise. And so that we have the certificate program, and then we also do executive sessions at different times in the year. Normally in September and February are the executive sessions. This year with COVID, everything's a little bit in flux, so I think that's life for everybody. So we'll be announcing our 2021 intensives probably within the next month, again, subject to COVID, where we're all doing that dance. Now, today we're talking about Saint Josemaria's leadership style, his management lessons. And I think for some, instinctually, we say, wait, why are we looking to the saints as experts in management? And we think, what, which business school did they go to? Well, the fact is that many of the saints were, in fact, tremendous leaders who grew incredible institutions. And keep in mind that they all worked for or within the context of the oldest nonprofit on the face of the earth, the Roman Catholic Church. So the leadership, I think, also in the context of Christianity has some unique Christian aspects, which I think we'll be bringing out today. And I have to say that in preparing for this webinar, I found it very refreshing because management seemed very accessible. I had the privilege of working with our panelists in a preparatory session, and it was like, okay, these are management principles that anyone can apply in their lives. Now, Saint Josemaría, he was born in 1902, died in 1975. He was from Spain. He started the prelature of Opus Dei. One of the main charisms of it is the sanctification of ordinary life, and that all of us are called to be saints wherever we are in life. And all of us includes the laity. It's a universal call to holiness, which was then obviously, re-articulated by Vatican II. And I would say it was St. Francis de Sales several hundred years before St. Josemaría emphasized this as well. It's a consistent theme throughout the church. And so today we're going to be looking at some of the principles. One of the things that I want to bring up, though, is just a quote from St. Josemaría. He talked about the fact that there were two types of shepherd. And he said there's the first type who goes behind the sheep and pushes them. And he says, and then there's a second type that goes and walks in front of the sheep and, looks back and calls to them, encouraging them. And he said he liked to think of himself as the second type of shepherd. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers. We were very fortunate to be joined by three people, two of whom were able to work with Saint Josemaría two of whom have served on the General Council of the of Opus Dei. So I'm going to start first with Sharon Hefferan, who's in DC. Sharon is the executive director of Yuma Center, and it's a lead a center that is a leader in providing professional perspectives to women of all ages. And what I like about this is that Sharon and the Yuma Center really work to incorporate, again, professionalism in every aspect of your life. If you're a stay-at-home mom, there's a professionalism to be incorporated. If you're a CEO of a big company, there's a professionalism to be incorporated. So I like that broad approach. Sharon previously worked in Chicago as the executive director of Metro Achievement Center, and it was an educational program serving at-risk youth. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Spanish from Georgetown and an MBA from Iona College. We are also joined by Federico Riera-Marsa, who is the president of the Clover Foundation. Federico holds an MBA from ESADE Business School and a degree in management from the Polytechnic University of Catalonia. He has devoted most of his life to non-for-profit institutions in Italy and the United States. He's a president of Clover Foundation and a board member of other corporations, and he also collaborates with ESADE Business School in New York. Like Pablo, Elton, our third participant, Federico served on the General Council, is a former member of the General Council of Opus Dei. Pablo comes to us from Hong Kong, and we're very grateful for his participation. It's about midnight there, so I hope he's a night owl. Anyway, very gracious to share his time with us. Pablo is the regional manager at East Asian Educational Association, a charity based in Hong Kong, and it's dedicated to spreading education in the Southeast. From 1998 to 2010, he was a member of the General Council of Opus Dei, and he has a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from the Catholic University of Chile in Santiago. So welcome to you all. One of the things that I noticed in your backgrounds is that they're very different, and yet you've all been in management positions. I want to start today, again, I want to start with some of the principles of Saint Josemaria's thoughts on management, and then move on to some kind of practical applications in your own experiences. So Federico, perhaps if I can turn to you first. What are some of Saint Josemaria's guiding management principles? And again, the fact that these are principles means that we can apply them at many different levels.
Let's see. Well, I think one of the characteristics of the way he dealt with people was, first of all, to trust everyone a lot. And that precisely encouraged people to be very responsible. So the first thing is to say, well, I trust you. He said also he preferred to be deceived, let's say, by one, rather than to remove his trust from the vast majority of people. So I think that gives a special responsibility, knowing that you are trusted, that you are someone who is going to make a difference. Another point is the need for collegiality, of working together. We don't have all the answers. We don't know everything. We have to listen to others. And then, obviously, other people, not necessarily only experts, but also people who are on the ground, maybe people who are younger than us with less experience, but they have the possibility of having an insight that perhaps someone who has been around for many years doesn't have. So there is a freshness also that can be contributed. Another point, I mean, someone was asking, and when you give your opinion and the final result is not what you were proposing, what happens? Well, the decision of the majority is accepted, and then you make this decision your own, and you bring it about, you put it into practice as if it were your own decision, because you are part of this process of decision making, and then you carry it out with conviction, not saying, "Oh, that's not going to work because I was against it." So you participate in this. Another point, I think, it's the need for formation, to be trained. And Saint Josemaría, I would say, at least in the government of Opus Dei, he himself was a school of training, and he was surrounded by people who were much younger without experience. And he worked with them and he taught them. And once they were trained, they sent them to other countries because, well, this person is someone I can trust. We have been working together, and then, so to speak, was starting not from scratch, because some of them continued, but also many new people who was going through this process, working with him and learning. And I don't know if I mentioned the respect for freedom. I said that listening to others, and when people had studied something, normally they made an executive summary to submit to him, and then saying everything, not something long, something brief, and a summary, saying the pros and cons, and that's something which helps also to know how to filter things which are not relevant, but say everything which is relevant, so that the person making the decision, so you are not trying to put things in such a way that you get away with your proposal. You have to do it honestly and saying everything, but also in a way that people can understand without using technical terms, but things which anyone can understand. And maybe a last point, that the people should know that we can be wrong, we can make mistakes, and if we are wrong, we rectify, and that's it. So it's not a matter, we don't believe ourselves infallible, we can make mistakes, but we have to learn from them and rectify when we have done something, or made a decision or said something which was not right because we didn't have the information for whatever reason.
Sharon, I was wondering if you
Sure.
could maybe jump in here,
Yes.
and especially you have an MBA. If you could add to this conversation, and Federico has an MBA as well. But like, what struck you as different from the principles of Saint Josemaría compared to the standard expectations that are taught to an MBA student?
Right. Okay. Thanks. I would say, first of all, if we were to characterize Saint Josemaria's leadership style, we have to include faith in the equation. He was very long-term. He counted on the Holy Spirit. And then when it came down to management, he was very much guided by charity. Now, that isn't something you normally hear in a business school, that kind of framework. And I would add that Saint Josemaría was more of a macro manager than a micro manager. He was always looking at the big picture. He was concerned with the why more than the how. And often in business school, you're looking at processes and how are we going to roll out this marketing campaign? And he left that to the lay people. He was interested, very interested, but it wasn't something that he was absorbed with, if you will. And I would say too, humility, right? Federico spoke to that. He was interested in knowing what everybody had to say. It was very collaborative. And that was, again, kind of a high level framework that he used that influenced his management style in the particular, if you will. And that made him very nimble. And as Federico said, he could change gears if there was new information. And the last point that Federico brought up, and I think this is addressed in business schools, but perhaps in a church setting, it would again have that spiritual component. Some people look at Opus Dei and say, it's like a faucet, it's constantly running water, it's constantly giving formation, and I would agree with that. But again, Saint Josemaría would go to principles of action. He would although he would make concrete suggestions, he would stay often on that level of where are we going? Why are we doing that? And I think especially in the church, that kind of decentralization, which we'll probably talk about later, doesn't really work unless people are formed. And to the same point of trusting in people, when you constantly help them understand the why, the principles, the mission of the church, the mission of Opus Dei, you can give people that freedom and let them go. And I think that's a wonderful approach and really the basic principle of management.
Thank you. Pablo, if I can turn to you, and before I do that, I just want to let the audience know, if you have questions, you'll notice at the bottom of the screen, there's a little Q&A icon. Click on that and you can submit your questions and we'll do a Q&A at the end of the session. We welcome all of your questions, and we are doing our best to incorporate them in kind of a follow-up, which we're developing, but we're a work in progress. So anyway, please submit your questions at the bottom there, and we'll get to them at the end. Pablo, I just wanted to follow up on this idea of formation. So Saint Josemaría said that people who manage money need to be holier and saintlier than others. So again, following on Sharon's point, that's not something that you hear in business school. And Saint Josemaría never said that priests needed to be holier than others. So why this emphasis on money? Why? And it's something similar. Mother Teresa said that, you know, that temptations involving money were greater for a priest than sexual temptations. So why did Saint Josemaría specify, you know, that people who manage money need to be holier and saintlier? Because again, that's not a lesson I've ever heard taught in a business school.
From my experience, working also in the General Council as a General Administrator, first of all, I think we are trustees of somehow taking care of donations or people that give in many parts of the world to develop the apostolic works. I not only in Opus Dei, but in the whole church. Okay, so I think this has to make us in first term to think that we will need to give an account of how did we manage this money. Okay, and that money many times is the fruit of the effort of people you will never get to know in this earth, but in this world. But I mean, have done a lot of efforts to give that money to the church, to an institution of the church, and so on. So there is a big responsibility behind that. Well, second, I would say that I mean, money is good. it helps in the case we are talking to develop many apostolic activities of the church. But when you manage that money, you always have the temptation, not to be careful, to spend in something that is not needed, to shortcuts. I mean, don't ask, for example, for 3 quotations, no, to see which is how can you spend the money better. Well, all that requires virtue. I think when Saint Josemaría talks about people manage money have to be holier, he's saying that those people managing money in the church have to develop a number of virtues in a special way. For example, prudence, be carrying on with a sober life, okay, not taking advantage that you have money at your disposition to do whatever you want. Leave the personal poverty and the personal detachment. So I think that this is why Saint Josemaría, I mean, I don't think Saint Josemaría saw anything bad in the money. It's just that, well, we get attached to material things. And if we are not careful, we can. The last thing I would like to say also, that at least as an administrator, I have experienced many times, is that financial things are difficult for other people to understand. And sometimes if you are not careful, you can end up doing the administration on your own. So, and that is part of the virtue that you have to acquire, is to be always transparent, showing what you are doing, putting in place the mechanism so other people can follow up what you are doing. Well, I don't know if it answered your question.
It does, and I want to shift to Federico, just to talk about like some of the practical aspects of handling financial matters, because clearly both within the church and outside of the church, there have been a lot of financial scandals, and when they happen, we all say, how did this happen? Well, I think that they happened because some general principles weren't followed. And Federico, you had sent me a few guidelines that are used in it that are kind of within the context of collegiality, and I want to talk more about that in just a moment. But just really practical guidelines that help to ensure financial transparency and accountability. Do you want to share some of those?
Yes, sure. So one thing that Saint Josemaría always insisted is that people shouldn't have, be available, have funds available on their own. So for example, to have a joint signature when using bank accounts. Also, even nowadays, cash is practically disappeared, but there is a petty cash box. Well, to have two people who control the cash box and who was named, they reconcile the balance on a regular basis, or obviously to have a budget and even expenses which are inside the budget to be approved by several people, and the budget to have to be approved collegially. I don't know, things which are of common sense that anyone would do, like checking invoices before paying them. If you get money, to count it in front of the other person. If you are giving money, asking to count it in front of you, so that there are no surprises. So that kind of things. And I was thinking of something else. So I think these are quite small details that are important at the time of handling financial matters.
So I wonder if I could turn to Sharon. You had talked about the fact that Saint Josemaría was really more of a macro manager than a micromanager, right?
That's correct.
And yeah, and so Sharon, maybe if you could talk about, again, let's kind of moving to the topic of collegiality. What does that mean? Because I think that's important for understanding even these little basic principles of some prudential suggestions that Federico offered about finances. They're not going to work in a situation in which there's a disparity of power. So Opus Dei or Saint Josemaría proposed and advocated and implemented collegiality, which can you explain what the principle of collegiality is, Sharon, and how that could address the challenges that would be in other structures where there would be a disparity of power?
Right. Yes, absolutely. There are always more than one person working on a project, and typically you will find 3 people on a team. No one ever is alone, you would say, working in the government of Opus Dei. And so that team of 3 or team of 9 or 7, whatever it is, they're always working diligently on projects together. And I was thinking about this. I think it's fair to say that Saint Josemaria's approach to collaboration, to collegiality, was very professorial. I know we have some professors on the call. And what do I mean by that? Is that everything was studied and almost always on paper, right? So that's a very thorough approach to things. It takes a lot longer. I would say it definitely hits against our American style of efficiency. And so for those of us who are from the States, it can be a little harder to work that way. But that is really true collaboration. And I think because of that, everyone in Opus Dei, especially in any form of government, local, national, international, everyone has a voice. And I just wanted to tell a quick story about that. 2 years after I had gotten out of college, I was 22, and I was helping on one of those teams of 3 in New York. And I happened to be on the team with the woman who started Opus Dei in the United States. She was 40 years my senior, very, very wise, and clearly very dedicated. She came when she was about 18. So I would go to these meetings that were supposed to be collaborative, and I would just listen to her talk, and I wouldn't say anything. And finally, she said to me, Sharon, you need to speak up. And I thought, why? I have nothing to say. And her point was that, yes, you have the grace of God, you have a head, and let's count on the Holy Spirit to inspire you. And I think in that way, when we sum up Saint Josemaria's collaborative style, I think we can say that everyone in Opus Dei has a voice, and absolutely in government. And to Federico's point, everyone should speak up. Thank you.
So in those teams, then is everybody considered an equal player? Is there a hierarchy, or is everybody an equal player?
There is someone who's at the head who would be the director, and he or she would pull the consensus together, but it would go with the vote of majority. So it's not that the director, because they have that, if you will, head role, runs the show. It really is a work of collaboration, a work of unity, which is kind of a key word here. The goal is to have unity and say, okay, what is God telling us? What does the spirit of Opus Dei inspire us? In what direction? And how can we apply it best? And it's those nitty-gritty applications where there can be a difference of opinion, but the goal is always to come to that consensus, to have some unity.
And so that unity, I think, takes it a step further than simply majority rules, because unity, if I'm correct, that means that everybody is saying, look, I'm getting on board with this. I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm the outsider here. So does unity mean that I'm getting on board, even if I didn't agree with this, I have committed to get on board and I will represent this as our collective decision?
Very well put. And that's it. And that takes a lot of humility. So again, to Pablo's point, Federico's point, there's a lot of virtue at play here. It's not an easy power grab or assertiveness. And that's where I think too, this method of management or government, if you will, really gives a voice to the introverts, to the quiet one, precisely because things are done on paper without emotion, without, again, studied well. And I think that's where that professorial approach comes into play.
So if I can turn to Pablo. Pablo, you've worked with a lot of business professionals in the boards of your schools and so forth. How do those professionals respond to this style of leadership? Is it something that is it totally new to them? Is it something that they've already been practicing? Do they learn from this style of management and then implement it in their own lives? Because this is something that you must come into contact with many, many professionals in all the boards for your different schools.
Yes, that's a very good question, Pia, because I think many times we have to give a lot of formation to the people in the board regarding how does collegiality work, okay? Explaining essentially what Sharon just shared with us. I would just would like to give a short example. I participated in Rome in many meetings of the General Council, that is the council governing Opus Dei all over the world. And every time that we were asked to give an opinion, the prelate would be the last one to give his opinion. So he would start asking people around. And even sometimes after listening to everyone, he would not give his opinion. And he would say, okay, we will study this matter a little bit more or whatever. And that is a very important thing in collegiality, is to listen to the others. And in the case of the prelate, he's saying, my opinion is one more, might be a very important opinion, but I have to listen to you. If I'm the first one to talk, maybe some people will feel that, well, not contradict him, okay? And sometimes it happened to me, and I think a few times that my opinion turned out to be totally contrary to his opinion. So I felt
and then
very
what happened? And
well,
then what happened?
Then it happens that either you change your opinion, something is decided by a majority, and you, as you said, the next step for you or for the one who has a different opinion is to join the majority with unity. because it's good to, I think Sharon mentioned this at the beginning. We are doing we're talking here in the context of an apostolic endeavor, okay? So what you are trying to do is something good. And I would say that the last thing I would say in this topic is something that I learned from the actual prelate also, is that normally things have very different solutions. I mean, you can give very different solutions. There's no dogma or no doctrine in many issues. And we need to be open to accept solutions that maybe we don't understand fully, but are the solutions of the majority and are good enough in some sense. No?
So Pablo, did you see cases when you were on the general council, were there instances when the prelate held the minority opinion and he, on the basis of collegiality, accepted the opinion of the majority?
Yes. I'm thinking now in a case in which he asked the general council if it was useful to organize an activity. And he told us, please have a meeting among yourselves and come out with a proposal. I positively knew that he wanted that meeting to be held. And we came with a solution, said, we don't want this meeting to happen. And he accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe he was not convinced that we were right, but it was one solution. And it was a coherent and a solution taken with responsibility.
So Federico, maybe if I can turn to you, a friend of mine who worked with Don Alvaro told me that Don Alvaro would just say, make a decision. Like, you can't postpone things to the inevitable. You have to make a decision. And even if it's the wrong decision, you will learn from that, but you have to do something. Federico, can you speak to that? Did you see that mentality or that process applied? Was it fruitful? Was it successful?
I don't remember now any specific case, but I remember that he had very tough situations. I mean, and moments, especially I lived there that has nothing to do with management. Well, maybe he has management. When he was trying to get the juridical situation of Opus Dei in the church. And at times there were moments, well, we are in God's hands. We cannot do anything. We have done everything we have to do, and we are in God's hands, which are the best hands where we can be. That doesn't answer your question. I don't remember now any specific situation. I can tell you something about Blessed Alvaro, Bishop Alvaro, and that has to do with what you were saying earlier, and Sharon and Pablo, that the monies that when you are administrating in a not-for-profit, and especially in something of the church, an apostolic undertaking, are the donations of many people. And there was a lawyer from Latin America who had been, the founder of Opus Dei very well, and he was involved with managing many apostolic undertakings and on many boards. And then one day he was in Rome, and Bishop Alvaro told him, you have to be very careful the way you spend these monies. And he said, more or less, let's see if I remember his words, when I make an expense, I think that this is the money or the contribution of the poorest person in the poorest country, and that I am using that money. And Bishop Pablo was very, very moved, very much impressed. And I remember he repeated that idea many times. When he was talking to other people, he told them, I can tell you someone who, and this was a senior person, a lawyer, very well known in his country. And he said, well, I was very moved because he told me this. And maybe that's something we have to bear in mind when we are making expenses also at times, so to see the origin of those donations, the origin of those funds, and we cannot manage them as they were our own, because they are not our own. And with our money, we can do, I mean, living the detachment and poverty which Christian faith teaches us. But I mean, we can do, let's say, what we want, but not when we are managing money from others. And we have to be very responsible from that point of view. Another thing that has to do a little bit with this, and that comes from Saint Josemaría, and not the situation you were bringing up. In Roman law, at times they say that a good administrator has to handle things with the diligence, with the care of a good paterfamilias. And Saint Josemaría said that when you don't have anyone to consult and to run your opinion by someone else and to have this sounding board, think what would the father of a poor and numerous family do? And the father of a large family, a large poor family, what would he do in that situation? And then maybe if it was something for himself, he would say no. If it was something for his children, he would say yes. But this, like a rule of thumb, to decide whether this is responsible or is not responsible. So this thing of the origin of the donation we are managing, and this criteria of a good family, of a large family.
Thank you. Sharon, if I can segue back to you, there's two things that I want to bring up here. I think that, so Federico touched on administration and stewardship. These are, how do we translate that along with this idea? Because every speaker, every one of you has talked about holiness and the Holy Spirit and virtue. So how do you translate that for, again, a secular mindset? How do you make, because I think what Saint Josemaría was proposing is something that can be applied in many different situations. So how do you translate it?
Well, I would say when I read Harvard Business Review, I see virtue all over the place. Resilience, AKA perseverance, right? So I think virtue is attractive, and everything that is demanded of us in our quest for holiness or in our performance, if you will, of government tasks, it's very embedded in virtue. Why is that? Because that is the reflection of Christ, right? And we think often, right, how would Christ solve this problem? And so I think there's a great connection there. So I've never found a disparity, if you will, between what we're doing to run Opus Dei and what could make you an awesome professional in the professional world.
And so you find that though, but if somebody isn't familiar with the language, how do you find that it translates for them?
Well, I think, for example, you see in many schools, they talk about character formation. There are character education programs throughout the United States. And that is, and not totally, not on a supernatural level, but on a wonderful human rich level, it is totally communicating the messages that, you know, we've just spoken about, really, I think, on a virtue front.
Yeah. And then I just want to go back to Pablo. Pablo, during our kind of pre-session that we had last week in preparation, you talked about talent management and people development, because obviously this is important in management. You've got to continue to grow the team, no matter how small or how big it is. It has to be continually nurtured. It has to be continually grown. So within these principles that Saint Josemaría put forward, how would you approach, or how do you approach talent management and the development of people?
Okay, maybe the first thing is, I think that a very important principle of management is to consider the centrality of the person. And then before considering the material, I mean, the financial means or whatever, you develop a company or an organization because you have good people working, and you form people to work well, okay? So let's go back to Saint Josemaría, just a short example. When he started the first General Council of Opus Dei, that was back in 1935, okay? So this was 7 years after founding Opus Dei. And he put in that general, he appointed in that general council 5 people. And these people had ages ranging from 25 to 33 years. Well, really, I mean, there was only one of 33. The others were in their 20s. And he, at that moment, and it's written in some books, he explained collegiality. And he said, I want you 5 to give me your opinion, okay? So this is, I think, and like this, there are many examples, but this an example of how he formed people since the very beginning. He was the founder. He was the founder also of an institution who came with an idea that was not quite accepted at that moment, that lay people could be saints. And since the very beginning, he was relying on the people around him and giving assignments of government and so on. So yeah, I think it's this centrality of the person, and the formation is to understand what you are doing. I always remember that in The Way, one of his famous books, he writes something like this: apostolic works don't fail because of lack of money. They fail because of lack of spirit. And that means that the person who are taking care are not well formed. Maybe they don't know the vision, the mission, or in the case of the church, maybe even they lack the faith to push with that initiative.
Thank you. Before we switch to question and answer, I wanted to hit on one other theme, decentralization and autonomy. I mean, this seems to fit very well with the church's teachings on subsidiarity. Yes. Maybe Federico, you can speak to this a little bit, but it's also, you know, the church right now, we are in many cases, we are big organizations, sometimes big bulky bureaucracies. Our dioceses are big. This principle of decentralization, how would that make our current church entities look very different? Because in Opus Dei, there isn't this big organization, corporation, Opus Dei, that owns all of the projects and all of the apostolates and initiatives throughout the world. Each one of those is independently run. It has its own board, its own bylaws, its own governance. It's not part of, you know, Opus Dei headquarters, like in a big corporation, right? So but we're not seeing the church run like that. And so I was just wondering, maybe Federico or whoever wants to jump in here, what does decentralization look like? And it seems to be a challenge for the church.
Yeah. So here, the apostolic works of Opus Dei have been started most of the time by local people in different cities, in different places, studying what's relevant for that city, for that place. Sharon knows well about Metro Center in Chicago. And the people running those initiatives and those undertakings, well, first of all, they need to be prepared. They need to be competent. They try to surround themselves with people who have the right formation to do that. And they have to do the fundraising. They have to put together a business plan, a strategy. So they run that professionally. And they are responsible for that. Opus Dei, the only thing that's there is to secure the Christian formation, the Christian, at times we can use the expression orientation, you know, the Christian content. But Opus Dei doesn't get into the technical aspects of the school, technical aspects of that initiative. And therefore, the board, they are responsible for that. And they are not expecting to get help from somewhere else. They know that they are the ones who have to bring it about. And so, well, you want also to make sure when you create, many times they have self-perpetuating boards. Well, to invite other people who share the mission, who share the principles of this initiative. And you are the ones supporting it. You are not looking at someone else to give you a hand. At the same time, I have to say that the founder of Opus Dei also understood that perhaps in, I don't know, developing countries, poor countries, especially at the beginning of the work of Opus Dei, they may need to have help from the outside. And then richer countries, richer nations could help them financially. But that doesn't take any responsibility from them. So the idea is to be self-supporting, to go out and fundraise, and also for the financial stability of those entities, of those undertakings, something that Bishop Álvaro, following the inspiration of Saint Josemaría, what he had taught them, encouraged people to set up an endowment fund. When people are very much concerned about getting donations for operations, it seems a dream to be, how am I going to think now to start an endowment? They would say, well, just set 10% of your donations aside to build up this endowment little by little. And maybe sometime you'll get an inheritance, and that's going to help this plan, this endowment. But the idea of being responsible, those who are running it, and that they are not looking at someone else to solve their problems.
Thank you. I want to give each of you a chance to kind of give a quick closing remark. And tied into that, though, I'm going to already jump into our questions. We have somebody asking for books about Saint Josemaría that address management issues or other similar books. So if any, in your final remarks, I'll start with you, Sharon. If anybody has any books or resources to add, please do.
Well, I would add that to prepare my comments, I went back to a collection of interviews that Saint Josemaría had back in the 1960s, and it's called Conversations with Monsignor Escrivá. And there he talks about lay people, the church. I gleaned a lot of my management ideas from that. So I would recommend Conversations with Monsignor Escrivá.
Great. Thank you. Federico, any last thoughts, comments?
I mean, I have discovered in that book, Foro, that if you enter the word government or something similar, you get a number of insights from Saint Josemaría about management and about, for example, one I remember now is that to manage is to lead people and get the best out of them. At times we would like to manage with ideal people. Ideal people do not exist. So we have to manage with the people we have collaborating with us.
Right, thank you. And Pablo.
Yes, I would recommend the book, Friends of God. This book is about virtues and has a lot of text about human virtues. And just a short commentary, I think it's good to think also that the virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance are virtues that come from the Greek that were not Christians at that time. So it's important because sometimes we can think the virtues is a sort of Catholic idea. Virtues were somehow pointed out before Jesus Christ came to earth. So I think it helps also to think how to explain to other people that management is about virtues. You don't need to be a Catholic to live virtues.
Amen. So I want to look to a couple of our questions. We have several, and we're going to try and get to as many of them as possible. And for this, I'll just ask each of the panelists to jump in where you feel comfortable. So we have one question here. Trust is key in teamwork. How can we prevent mistrust from emerging in a team? Where does mistrust start? I like that. Where does mistrust start?
I would say that mistrust starts when you do not show confidence in your employees or the people working for you. And I guess this speaks to this idea of being a macro manager. This is a particular principle that I apply as often as I can, and I got it from Saint Josemaría. He would say, if there is some specification, say it on the front end. And if you did not share that with your team, your staff, and they come up with a solution different than what you would have liked, too bad, right? So that has helped me as a manager. And I think it speaks very much to this point. Building trust because they see they can come up with solutions that are new, fresh, and different.
Yeah. If I can then, we have a question here. In my diocese in Cameroon, people are unwilling to engage in financial management of church business. Any suggestions to help to help get people more involved in the financial management?
Well, I would say there might be many reasons for not willing to get involved. Some reasons might be very material. I don't have time, whatever. But sometimes it can happen that the person is a good Catholic, would like to help the church, but he feels that he hasn't had the formation. Again, I would go back to this idea. Talk personally to the person, find out what is his real problem, and try to come up with a solution. If the solution is that he needs training, try to provide training, okay? Of course, if the solution is that the person is lazy, maybe there is very little to do. But I think it's very much needed to talk to the person to identify the problem and not say in general, because, well, I mean, it's difficult to find something concrete to do with each person.
Yeah. Let me move on to a third question. This participant writes, the church must witness the Trinitarian God in a way that brings equality, mutuality, and participation. Isn't that what we're talking about here?
I would say absolutely. I think the goal is to, if I'm going to give a Trinitarian example, I might say it's the pastor and the layman and the laywoman, right? And that you have a great dynamic there. And the goal would be to entrust as much as you can to the laymen and the laywoman, thereby freeing up the pastor to do what only they can do, give the sacraments, advise, etc.
Great. Someone offered a book. I'm not sure if any of our participants are familiar with it. It's Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. The book is called Start With Why, which is precisely to orient managers to that important question. The prefrontal cortex does the executive action of the brain, the what, the how, etc. But in the area of trust, commitment, discernment, confidence, where decisions are being made, lies in the limbic core of our brain. And that is best addressed by, oops, I just lost it. Anyway, anybody familiar with that book?
I'm not familiar.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, I am actually. And I would add, I totally agree. You have to know why, where are you going? Why are we doing all these processes in the parish or diocese? And one point that I wanted to make was that Saint Josemaría had a very bottom-up perception on communication. And there are two practical ways he did that. One is that in every country, every decade or so, there's an all call for feedback from every single person in the prelature, the married person, the peasant, whoever it is, please give us feedback. And that's a way to see. That's a way for the directors and the prelate to see and to learn how are things being lived, and is everybody cohesive around the why. And I will share with you, not so long ago, we had this in the United States, and the director said, could everyone please respond and speak to poverty and how we use material things? Can we do this better? And people came up with a boatload of ideas and recommendations. And so I think that constant communication can help us get it. Are we really speaking to the why? And secondly, at any time, people have the opportunity to write the prelate. right? So that is another way of that constant communication. I think, again, keeps people focused on the mission, which is really the why behind any parish, any diocese.
Thank you. We have several questions on virtue, and we talked a lot about virtue in this session. I wanted to ask with virtue, is it easier or more is it more useful to focus on someone's strengths or virtues rather than to focus on the weaknesses? And if so, how do you address the weaknesses?
I think that an important virtue is sincerity, to tell the truth. At times, the person in authority doesn't know what's going on because they hide the reality from them. Mm-hmm. And then they make decisions which are not addressed to the real situation because they don't know the real situation. And people under the authority at times are afraid of letting him know what's going on. And so I think that's a very important virtue, sincerity. And well, even at times we may have made a mistake. Recognize, accept that I have made a mistake. But I think that's an important virtue.
Great. I just wanted to mention one more resource that one of our participants mentioned. In terms of talent management, there's the Gallup Organization Strengths Finder test, which identifies your strengths. So a person can focus on what they're really good at and avoid the things they're not strong at. But we did this, I did this on a team, and it was really fascinating when we did these strengths because we were supposed to be a team of leaders, and it turned out that only one person in this leadership team had the strength of strategic thinking. So it really made me step back and say, wow, I'm not sure about this from the perspective of a leadership team. You'd like to have more than one person on a leadership team that is able to do strategic thinking. But I'm glad that this was brought up. It's the Gallup Organization's Strength Finder test. And so I'll mention that as a resource. In closing, I want to just be mindful of everybody's time. Any of the participants have any final thoughts before I wrap things up?
This is Sharon. I'd be happy just to mention, we spoke a lot about formation, and you were just speaking to this, that forming your staff is so key. And I would say making the parish, for example, a place for growth for everyone, not just your parishioners, but your staff, because they're the ones that are responsible for transmitting the mission. And I think that's what Saint Josemaría did. And then we heard a lot about professionalism, excellence, and also in church management, to be professional, to be excellent, because the beauty of work well done cannot be underestimated. Certainly it's a reflection of Christ. And I believe that it will attract souls to your work and will encourage apostolate and evangelization. And I think Saint Josemaría knew that. His big secret was the best looking room in the house should be the chapel, right? And so when it's Eucharistic and there's beauty, people will come.
Thank you very much. I want to, oh yes, please.
Yes, I want to make a short comment about what you say, the last thing you say about developing the skills we have. The comment is this: each one of us has a temperament, okay? We cannot change our temperament. For example, if I'm choleric, I will always be choleric all my life. But what can I build is my character, okay? And I think this is where the virtues come in. Precisely the virtues help us to build our character. And I think this is an important issue in management, because if I only focus in the good skills of a person, I will never discover those hidden skills that I can build up, helping him to practice some virtues, okay? So that I think is important.
Thank you very much, Pablo. And again, thank you to all of our participants today and to our panelists. I really appreciate this. I know that it's a short amount of time to go into what is a very deep subject, but we hope to continue to go deeper and deeper into these topics as our webinar series develops. Again, I welcome any suggestions or feedback that people have, particularly as to how we can make these events as global as possible. I want to invite you to our third webinar, which will be on December 10th, also a Thursday at 8 a.m. Excuse me, 8 a.m. West Coast time. That's where I am, so I'm thinking about myself. But it's 5 p.m. Rome time, and it's the regular time schedule. You can find the information on our website. We will also be emailing it to all of our participants. The topic is financial transparency in the church now more than ever. And we will have three confirmed speakers. What we're going to be providing, this is going to be an interesting webinar too, because we're going to be generating out of this a white paper with some policies on financial transparency. So again, I urge you to join us. And then even sooner than that one, on November 27th, we have a virtual open house for anyone who's interested in learning more about the program of church management. I think it'll be at 3:30 Rome time. We'll be sending out information on that. That will feature Father Anthony Steppel, who has worked with the program of church management and who is also the vice rector of St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park. It'll be just a virtual open house. It's COVID, so people don't have the opportunity to come and meet in person. But as I've said many times, COVID is also giving us more opportunities to do these virtual events and to have more people involved. So that will be on November 27th, and we'll be sending out detailed information on that. And just an opportunity for people to ask concrete questions. What's the program of church management? And to figure out if it's a fit for them, whether the executive session or the year-long program in Rome. And that will be Father Anthony Steppel. So thank you all for your time. We very much appreciate it and look forward to being with you. Again, please keep us in your prayers and send your thoughts and suggestions. Thanks and God bless.